You are attending, albeit virtually, in your hundreds today. An illustration is such were needed that it is timely for us to reflect together on what more we can do to support our children and young people's creativity as we look forward with hope to brighter times. If ever there was a time for deep reflection on our future, this is it. We are slowly emerging from a global pandemic, and we are all asking important questions about the future. That is a theme that I'll come back to later in my contribution. Agus is sever, agus is luach for an star atá a going in Éireann, sa cruthacht agus nua líocht, quid lornach de phobal an Iláin riamh Is le béal idis, scéalaocht agus seanachas a tháinig ar star chuing tríd na glúnta. Tá clú agus cáil oring mór hímpel an dain dar scrígnóirí, dar geol tóirí agus dar nalín tóirí. Tá Eileen arsa, granta, I gloch héad chórtha I a héan siar na mílte blian. Séad córthaí dahar le aig a chórt na spéire, na réaltaí agus an réaltólaíocht. Cá visnú go raibh siad seo ina bhainte inspiráide do réalteolathe suntasacha na Héarden a le héadí Kenneth Edgeworth nó Agnes Mary Clark. Tá sé sna canáha oning an bhróchloch a bhúla agus splank a ghnóthú a spragan nu a smuinte, agus is chuige sin a támid an seohinúh le taú leis an mínach sin agus a spraga. But first, I want to talk about where I see Creative Ireland as the parent of the Creative Youth Plan in the wider policy landscape over the coming years. It seems to me that the real value of Creative Ireland is that it is at its heart a well-being initiative. The core proposition is that participation in cultural and creative activity promotes well-being at an individual, community, and national level. Every person has creative capacities that should be encouraged throughout their lives. Promoting creativity not only benefits our well-being, it also builds social capital and economic success. Creative youth is about delivering on this for children and young people so that you can become creative and engaged citizens. The Creative Youth Plan is about working towards a society which enables the innate creativity of all our young people to flourish. This, of course, is one part of the much wider vision of the Creative Ireland programme. However, in many ways, it is the most important part. It is about the future. Agus táimid déanamh inistíochta don todhchaí nuair a dhéanamid inistíochta in our báistí agus in our níní óga. Ireland has made enormous strides economically and socially over the past half-century. Policy choices on the whole have served us well, particularly in the area of education, an area very, very close to my heart. We were ready for the information age, and we have benefited tremendously from it. However, we are now moving into a very different age, an age when the primary determinant of success will be the ability to apply knowledge and expertise in previously unimagined ways. Robotics and artificial intelligence will displace substantial quantities of activity that is carried out manually today. Healthcare, the law, even teaching, all will change beyond recognition. Our future will depend on our ability to be creative and inventive, to solve problems, to work collaboratively and experimentally, and to think conceptually. And of course, this is what Creative Youth is about. Driving inspirational projects in school and out of school that capture the imagination of young people, that give them the confidence to be the creators of their own futures and the co-creators of their environment. The digital age is bringing many challenges. However, I think our creativity and innovation can transform this into a moment of opportunity. The opportunity for great scientific advances that will reduce human suffering. The opportunity to unburden ourselves of repetitive work and indeed to live more fully. That alone is a compelling case for the Creative Youth Plan. Ireland's future must be at the centre of the new age of creativity, imagination and innovation. However, there is another dimension to the Creative Youth Plan that I want to mention, the cultural aspect. The plan espouses the idea of a creative and cultural education for all of our young people. It challenges us to, I quote, encourage our children and young people to understand and celebrate not only our own diverse cultural values, but also the cultural values of others, and prepare them to engage as global citizens. The value of the Creative Youth Plan is that it draws multiple strands together. The digital age, multiple pathways to creativity, the power of the arts to stimulate independence and imagination, cultural engagement that leads to social cohesion, and offers a vision of a better future for and created by young people. The Creative Youth Plan is not just eminently good sense, but also a fine example of ethical policy making. Let me pause for a moment and talk about COVID-19, because there is, I believe, an important connection. Albert Einstein said, and I quote, "You can never solve a problem on the level on which it was created," unquote. Today, we are dealing with the impact of a devastating pandemic. We can and will deal with the problem on its own level by suppressing the virus and widespread immunization. However, we must also take the opportunity to learn from the pandemic. The pandemic has raised profound questions to the surface of everyday conversation about how we really want to live as a society, about how we care for the vulnerable and marginalized in society, about how we educate and support our children and young people, about how we deal with the climate change and biodiversity crisis. The list goes on. We hear much talk about getting back to normal, but it's obvious to me, and I'm sure to all of you, that normal isn't enough. We need to seize this opportunity to arrive at a new destination, and it is by harnessing our collective creativity, courage and imagination that we will get there. And most importantly, we have been reminded that our communities and our people are resilient, generous, thoughtful and kind. So what I am saying is this: yes, let's talk about post-COVID recovery, but let's bypass normal and let's have serious conversations about a better, more creative life in which everyone can flourish and be well. For this to happen and to have impact, we should build on what we already have. We have models of social engagement. We have local authorities that are hugely skilled as social and cultural enablers. We have parliamentary structures, and we have a proven model of citizens' assemblies. We also have Creative Ireland, Healthy Ireland, Global Ireland, initiatives that support well-being and global citizenship, and crucially, that are designed to work across government. And most of all, we have a society that is searching for better ways to live. So to conclude, in my view, Creative Ireland is about our fundamental well-being as a people. The basic premise is that we are all at our most human when we are being creative, and in particular, when we're being creative together. Creativity finds expression in all areas of human endeavor, from science and engineering to sport and play. But there is something different and something very special about the arts. It is unquestionable that active engagement with arts and culture nurtures creativity, empathy, and achievement in all spheres of endeavour. The Creative Ireland programme must, by definition, operate on an all-of-government basis. Its modus operandi is collaboration, agus ní neart go cur le chéile. It embraces government, academia, the arts community, the creative industries, our economy, our health and well-being, formal and non-formal education, volunteers and professionals, young and old. In the post-COVID world, the core ideas and objectives of Creative Ireland and the Creative Youth Plan will be more relevant than ever. It behoves all of us to work out how best to harness the ideas, the projects, the expertise, the collaborations, the energy and enthusiasm for change that is so evident in our society, and initiate a new, truly all-of-government creativity and well-being initiative for the next 5 years and beyond. I invite you to give us your best thinking on how that can be achieved, and I assure you that you will find in me and in this government an enthusiastic and collaborative partner. This is truly important work, and I thank you for your input into it. Gurv Mila Mila Mahagwiv Galer.
Thank you, Taoiseach. I'm delighted to welcome you here today to Creativity, this conference on creativity and the connection to our future. As the Taoiseach highlighted, creativity is really all about collaboration, as is the Creative Ireland programme. So it's fantastic to see so many people from so many different disciplines here today, from the education sector, from the arts sector, from academia and the creative industries. And I think both on the panel and watching at home and from your offices. And I think the volume of interest in the conference today really speaks as to how seriously we take the future of our children. So today we are going to begin speaking with a variety of different stakeholders from the education and business sector. And joining us first will be the Minister for Education, Norma Foley, to give us her perspective from the department.
Is an orhórdom sa bheileh agus bhhaile mar dús mo bhuachas a ghála socht an ama agus an deise ó hórtam chun labhart liviniuv. Hello to you all. I am delighted to be speaking to you today as part of Creativity, the Connection to Our Future Now, Creative Youth Conference 2021. The launch of the Creative Ireland Creative Youth Programme was a particularly significant step in enhancing the creative education of our children and young people. Never before has creative thinking and ability been more important for young people and society more broadly. Creativity, in its simplest form, is pure magic. It is not just putting paint on paper or assembling together chosen words. Through encouragement and empowerment, teachers, parents, and school learners can bear witness to a form of alchemy where dreams and hopes become a reality. It was George Bernard Shaw, I believe, who said, "Imagination is the beginning of creation. You imagine what you desire, you will what you imagine, and at last, you create what you will." To take this at its literal best, any work of art that exists in the mind can be brought to life with the right encouragement and self-belief. From Brendan Kennelly to Owen Colfer to Ruth Nega, Ireland has a proud tradition of creative genius, and I truly believe that it is our job as educators to ensure that creativity is cultivated as a central part of our schools, rather than treated as an add-on to the curriculum. Indeed, within the school environment, the arts play an important role in weaving together the academic and imaginative minds into a well-rounded education. Whether through music, the visual arts, or theatre, the many avenues provided by the creative arts create a uniquely common ground where both teacher and student can break boundaries and social conventions in the safety of a classroom setting. This is not a new phenomenon, and indeed since 2017, the Department of Education has been working in conjunction with the Arts Council, the Creative Ireland team and the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media, and the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth to see these initiatives developed, nurtured and indeed delivered. In doing so, we are also fulfilling another commitment of the Arts and Education Charter, which built solid foundations on which the Creative Youth Plan was built and launched in 2017 as an all-of-government initiative. A number of the initiatives under the Creative Youth Plan are delivered in partnership with other departments, including the Creative Schools Initiative, which is led by the Arts Council. Indeed, the expansion of creative schools was included in the programme for government, as was the enhancement of creative clusters, which is led by my own department. There can be no doubt but that today's children will be tomorrow's innovators. And what seeds are sown and nurtured in our classrooms will define future developments and inventions for years and years to come. Our STEM programs will help build scientists of the future, whose creativity will help forge life-altering breakthroughs and life-saving medicines. Creativity allows us to view and solve problems more openly, and without it, we would not have the COVID-19 vaccines, which will end this global pandemic. Whatever form it takes, creativity is about opening the mind, and as Shaw once said, making real the imaginary. It is an innovative and challenging time to be involved in the promotion of arts and creativity in education in Ireland today. One of the themes of the framework, Exploring and Thinking, encourages children to explore, investigate, and make exciting new discoveries. Our primary school children are provided with opportunities to foster and nurture their creative skills and talents. From junior infants to 6th class, a broad, rich arts education programme is provided and encompasses a range of activities, including the visual arts, music, drama, dance, and literature. Our children learn how to draw and paint. They learn how to appreciate music, perform, and compose. For many of these children, this is the beginning of a lifelong passion, one which offers an expressive outlet and sparks endless joy. Moving into post-primary education, we know that it is equally important that students be continually provided with creative opportunities. In junior cycle and leaving certificate cycle, students continue to engage with the arts. We have travelled a long road in reimagining and enhancing our education system, and this journey will never quite end. Our young people now have opportunities to participate in musical productions, choir, orchestra, fashion shows, photography, filmmaking, creative writing, script writing, radio production, songwriting, debating, the list goes on. As a teacher, I know it is our job to ensure that boundless curiosity and flair is carefully managed and integrated into a well-rounded education experience. The key objectives of Creative Youth are to expand young people's access to creative initiatives and activities, focus on the inclusion of every child, and support positive and sustainable outcomes for children and young people through creative engagement across formal and non-formal settings. With that in mind, the Department of Education has been working on a new artist residency programme, which will give pupils in schools all over the country the opportunity to work with a professional artist on unique, imaginative projects designed to inspire and empower our young people. I have witnessed firsthand the immense excitement that working with an artist creates within the classroom, and it is my ambition that this opportunity be afforded to as many of our children and young people as possible. I hope to be in a position to announce further details of this unique programme, which will deliver a bespoke, in-class experience designed to nurture tomorrow's brilliant actors, musicians, and artists. For it was Picasso who once remarked, "Every child is an artist. The problem is staying an artist when you grow up." It is true that COVID-19 has brought many challenges, but through creative teaching in an online space, education continued to provide an essential educational and social connection. I know that it has not been easy for students or for school staff, and I am very proud of how far our school communities have travelled in terms of the delivery of digital education. A new era is opening up for the universal integration of the arts and creativity as a core dimension of young Irish people's holistic education. I see this as immensely positive, where creative culture may be utilised to shake off the conventional boundaries, ensuring a rich and diverse learning space for all our students. At the heart of everything creative is a spark of pure magic. As educators, it is our job to ensure all our children and young people get the opportunity to experience that very magic. Gur maith go léir.
Thank you, Minister. And we're going to go straight to our first speaker, Arlene Forster.
Thanks, Sarah, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to start by thanking the Creative Ireland team for the invitation to be part of this really exciting conference. And for those maybe listening in who are a little bit less familiar maybe with the NCCA where I work, we're an agency of the Department of Education, and we provide advice to the Minister on curriculum and assessment for early childhood education, primary and post-primary schools. As I was thinking about today, I suppose one of the first things that came to my mind was Larry Malaguzzi, who is renowned the world over for his commitment to creativity and arts in education, in northern Italy in particular. But he wrote what's now a very famous poem entitled 100 Languages. And the first part of that poem paints a really rich picture of a child with a desire to express themselves in multiple ways. But the second part of his poem is not so upbeat, and it talks about school and culture killing what he refers to as 99 of those 100 languages. And the late Sir Ken Robinson would have spoken about this as well. I suppose coming here today from the curriculum perspective and the NCCA, I would argue actually that we've come quite a distance from that second image in Larry Malaguzzi's poem, and the Minister has touched a little bit on this as well. So from the perspective of, I suppose, embedding creativity and nurturing creativity and innovation from a curriculum perspective, I think we've had a number of significant developments over the last couple of years. But I think it is a case of a good bit done and more to do, which I'll pick up on later. I suppose looking at it from a curriculum perspective and going from early years right through to post-primary, I think there are three important ways in which the curriculum nurtures creativity and provides opportunities for children and young people in the creative space. The first one is, as the Minister touched on, it's the arts area itself, and the Minister alluded to the different subjects, and we have short courses and priority learning units in that arts space. A second way in which the curriculum more recently has really focused on creativity, and that is through what we call key skills or key competencies. And this is a feature internationally in curriculum development over the last decade or so. So if you look particularly at our post-primary curriculum, in junior cycle we have key skills, and one of these is very much focused on creativity, being creative. And equally then, at senior cycle, we have key skills around creativity and critical thinking. And we currently have a set of proposals out for the redevelopment of our primary curriculum. And one of the big ideas in those proposals is actually to do likewise at primary, to have a set of key competencies, one of which is about being creative right across the curriculum. So I think that's a really exciting possibility in the next couple of years. Ashton, our early years curriculum, I think has creativity and innovation right at its heart and throughout that framework. The third key pillar that I think is really important in the creativity space in curriculum is really about pedagogy. It's the how of teaching and learning. It's the types of experiences and activities that children and young people have access to. And there are two dimensions to this that the curriculum focuses on. One is teaching creatively, and the other is teaching for creativity. So teaching creatively, I mean, Ireland is renowned for the high calibre of its teaching profession. And you only have to walk into an early years environment or into a primary school or post-primary classroom, and you see so many creative pedagogies being used, from play, from inquiry-based learning, learning in the outdoors, collaborative dialogical methodologies being used. That is teaching creatively, and that's modelling creativity and creative thinking to young children and young people. The teaching for creativity is a piece, I suppose, that we see becoming increasingly important in more recent curriculum developments. And I refer to Ashton here and our framework for junior cycle, because there's a really strong focus on dispositions, creative habits of mind. So I suppose what we're really talking about here is that the factors or the conditions that are conducive to nurturing creativity. And those are twofold. That's about creating a classroom environment where young people and children feel safe and comfortable and confident to try out ideas, to pose interesting questions and then try to find the solutions to some of those questions and problems, to work together, to make mistakes, and to see that as an aspect of learning. And I suppose side by side with that then is these creative habits of mind, being willing to give things a go, persevering when the going gets tough, and being happy that if you hit a dead end, you can come back and try another way. And those are really important for nurturing creativity in our experiences in our education system, right from early years through to post-primary. So I suppose in pulling those three pillars together and going back to where I started, I think we've made considerable progress from a curriculum perspective in terms of creating opportunities and spaces in our curriculum for creativity to flourish and to thrive. But I think there's some really exciting developments in the next couple of years that are going to push that even further and strengthen the emphasis on creativity. And not only strengthen it, I think value creativity and innovation alongside the many other capacities and competencies that we value in our education system, right from early years through to post-primary. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Arlene. I'm delighted to hand over to Anne Looney now, who's going to, I suppose, respond to Arlene's curriculum outline and by giving us a sense from the teacher training background. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Arlene. That was really interesting. And I should say that I work at Dublin City University, but I used to do Arlene's job, or used to do the job that Arlene is trying to do now. So I wish her well in that context. I think when you step back, and it's great to hear that so much progress has been made, and I think I would share Arlene's optimism, Sarah, that the journey that the system is on is in the right direction. I think the kind of commitments that we're seeing in Ashter, in the new vision for primary education, in particular the junior cycle framework and the proposals for senior cycle reform, I think they all point in the right direction. But we're kind of getting to the crux of the matter and a critical point now. And I think the 2 points, the 2 speeches we had earlier from the Taoiseach and from the Minister probably point to, I suppose, the divergence of ideas about creativity. Because the minister spoke very well about the magic, the role of the imagination, the imaginative spark that every child is entitled to. And she rightly spoke, and I'm very enthusiastic to hear that the work that connects artistic practice to school, that's going to continue as part of creative youth, and I think that's going to be really important. But the Taoiseach pushed it a bit further. He spoke about the unimagined, the as yet unknown. And I think the school system can be much more comfortable with the idea of the imagination and nurturing the imagination, but less comfortable with the idea of opening children and young people to the as yet unimagined. If I'm saying that correctly, the as yet imagined, the unknown. And I think that stems from the fact that our education systems the world over are driven by 2 contrasting impulses. One is the conserving impulse, which is often fueled by nostalgia, a sense of, a quite legitimate sense that the job of schools is to hand things on, to give people a knowledge of the past, access to culture that we've had, and so it very much looks to the past. And that's a conserving force, I think. The second impulse is the one that looks to the future, the innovative impulse, the one that is the as yet unknown, that cliche that was around a while back, that we're preparing people for jobs that don't exist. Who knew we would actually prepare them for lives that we couldn't imagine even 2 years ago that we would be living now in a huge empty space in Dublin Castle, because we simply cannot gather. So those 2 conserving forces are very interesting in school systems. And I, this morning I posted out on social media, I said, well, which one wins in education debates? And the answer is probably the conserving impulse tends to be stronger. And it tends to be stronger the older you get. which is one of the great ironies of education, is that in fact we're quite open to the idea of discovering the unknown in early childhood education. We're quite open to play and putting children in sandpits and letting them discover things for themselves. But as young people, as children become young adults, we're more likely to be focused on the conserving impulse. And whether that is now sustainable for the kind of world that the Taoiseach outlined for us, where we're going to have to deal with increasing amounts of uncertainty, I think that's interesting. Now, it's not an either or. I think all education systems arrive at a settlement between those two forces. But the question is, in our system, are we happy with a settlement that would say we can live with lots of uncertainty for our youngest children, but as they get older and closer to adulthood, we'd like them to know the right answers and to be affirmed through a very strict assessment system, for example. So I think that's a really interesting point in thinking about creativity in our school systems. And then we think of our teachers in that school system who have to act as the bridge between those two conserving forces. So you've got teachers who are themselves product of the school system. They're trying to manage the interface between those two forces. And in teacher education, those two forces are equally strong. You know, we want our teachers, as Arlene said, we have a great reputation in Ireland for the quality of our teachers. We're really lucky that entry to teacher education continues to be competitive. People want to be teachers. And really smart people, creative people want to be teachers. So we find ourselves with that really rich resource for our system. But as we prepare them to teach, to what degree do we get the balance right between the conserving force and the creative one? I think we probably have a bit to go in that space. I think especially when we look at our newest teachers, when they come into a school, the degree to which the new that they bring, the new ideas they have, the new energy that they have, the degree to which schools can capitalise on that and use it to refresh the school system, or in fact, do our newest teachers end up captured by established practice and established by, well, this is the way we've always done things, or it was okay for you to learn that in college, but now you're in the real world and actually we don't have time for that. It all has to go back. So I think that's quite a tension that we have. I think a third point I'd want to make is a concern I would have that people talk about creativity as a whole school issue. And here I would concur completely with Arlene. It may well be a whole school issue, but if I'm a teacher in a classroom or I'm an early years educator in an early years setting, actually creativity is my business. And it's the micro interactions that I have as an educator with the students, with the children, that's where creativity sits. So even as we're preparing people to teach, in working with teacher education students, we can say, well, we have a culture of creativity in the university and we pride ourselves on that. But in the micro level engagements we have with people who are preparing to teach, is there creativity there? Are we open to the wrong answer, open to the search, open to the discovery, or are we just focused on getting them through the qualifications and getting them out there? So I think those three issues are really important for me. The balance between the conserving force and the innovative one, where does creativity sit? The role of teachers in that context as bridge builders, and that idea then of teacher education, making sure that we don't making sure that we focus on those micro-level interactions between teachers and students. And then when new teachers come into the system, are they a new energy? Are they a force for change? Or do they end up captured by existing practice?
Thank you, Anne. We've had a really great reflection of some of the very pressing issues within the Irish education system. We are going to go to have a look at this from the global perspective to speak with Andreas Schleicher.
Yes, hello. Is this me already?
Yes, good morning, Andreas.
Yes, good morning, and my apologies to be late. I was in a G20 meeting that got overdrawn, but I'm really happy to be here. Let me know when you want me to share my thoughts.
And well, we're ready to hear from you now. We've already heard from the curriculum perspective and teacher training perspective here in Ireland. And I suppose we're wondering how Ireland is faring from the global perspective.
Yeah, thanks so much. Creativity is something that everybody is talking about these days. You're doing that here in Ireland, and so are your neighbors in Wales and Scotland, and actually even more so faraway countries like China, India, Singapore, Thailand. And it's not very difficult to understand, why this has become the topic of the day. We live in this world in which the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have become easy to digitize, to automate. Creativity is the source of innovation, and innovation is what makes our economies and societies, evolve, go around. And but when it comes to education, it's easy to talk about it, really hard to build this into the fabric of our education systems. That's what we see when we look around the world. We know how to educate second-class robots, people who are good at repeating what we tell them. But what makes us, creative individuals, imaginative individuals now. The good thing is that there is no natural shortage of creativity. We are all born with an abundance of it. If you have a 3-year-old daughter or son, they're going to question everything you say and everything you do. They're going to experiment with everything. They're always open to novelty, always open to learn, always open to unlearn and relearn when the context changes. And as adults, sort of we lose it. In education, much of what we do is actually taking things away, not add to this. And that's something that we can see around the world. And then later on, we see that in our PISA scores. Now, the road to change in education, despite this ambition, is littered with so many good ideas that were often poorly implemented. Now, often people see a tension between creativity and knowledge. Obviously there's not. Knowledge is about, developing creativity. And we also at the OECD see a big drawback in our lack of ways to observe creativity. And what you cannot measure is always going to remain hard to improve. You can measure the product of knowledge, but you cannot measure the process of knowledge. And the most interesting results that we now get from our PISA outcomes is actually the capacity not to know what answer students got, but how did they get to the answer? What problem-solving strategies did they deploy? And I think this is where we have to become better, to be more creative in the way in which we educate and also look at results. And that's also no surprise that creative thinking is going to be, the focus of our next PISA assessment. So I can't share results with you now, but it's going to be something that is important. What we already know, and where I can compare Ireland, is the growth mindset that young people have. And it's always an important precursor for creative thinking. Now, one of the most powerful predictors of student learning outcomes, and you still have a significant share of 15-year-olds in Ireland who believe that success is about, my genes, my inborn intelligence. It's not, the result of my effort, my hard work, my trust in my own abilities. And I think that kind of mindset and belief is a very important, precursor for creativity. If you want young people to be imaginative, to creative, you have to give them space to experiment. And if they experiment, they will, take risks. If they take risks, they will make mistakes. In our capacity to help students recover from mistakes, learn from and with mistakes, I think that's often still lacking. I'm not saying this just about Ireland, but certainly you can see that in the PISA results for Ireland as well. And at the OECD also, we have just completed, and actually Ireland has been active in this work with practitioners to develop better tools to foster creative skills. And what we found first and foremost is that this isn't so much a question of teaching creativity as such. I think that's often a misunderstanding. No, it's mainly a question about, the learning methods that are being deployed. You can teach creativity in the arts, but you can teach it equally well in mathematics and science. It's not so much about the curriculum. It's more about our approach to learning. And of course, it depends on the, learning environments, and then how they are, powered by, creative teachers, imaginative teachers, how we support creativity in pedagogy, reward, interesting work. And I must actually tell you, this is the part where I'm most inspired and intrigued by, the Creative Ireland initiative. What I can see in your work is, and I find it quite rare elsewhere, is the systemic alignment. We just heard, from your Prime Minister how this cuts across all sectors of the society. And I see that kind of environment, that ecosystem, is what teachers need to take the courage to become more creative in their work. And if they do so, you're going to see your students to become more creative.
Thank you, Andreas. I suppose we've seen through Andreas's speech there a kind of a slight shift away in the focus to looking at, I suppose, the way in which creativity functions outside of the education system and perhaps into the future of our children. So I'm delighted to welcome Michelle Cullen from Accenture to discuss with us, I suppose, the importance of creativity within the business field. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah, and hi, everybody. I mean, creativity has really never been more important in business. If you think about the rapid pace of change, the ability to solve problems, to work collaboratively, and to use data, but also storytelling to understand and describe complex issues, it's more critical than ever. And if you look at even before COVID, more than half of the Fortune 500 companies from just the year 2000 have ceased to exist. So businesses need to innovate. We help organizations every day to implement change. And yes, it is about using digital technology, but over and above that technology, it is the human skills, empathy, creative thinking, collaboration. Those are the essential factors for change. And to solve complex issues, we just need creative thinking. And it is a skill. I'll echo what others have said this morning. It's a skill that can be learned and nurtured. There are tools such as design thinking that we would use to help to nurture creativity in problem solving and in coming up with solutions. And fundamentally, you have to start with diversity. You have to bring different people to the table, different backgrounds, experience and skills, including different education, from artificial intelligence, software engineering, but also very much the humanities and design to come up with new solutions. And if you look at things like a recent example from Rothco, part of Accenture Interactive, in the development of Say Lists, which uses the sound repetition of music playlists to help children to practice problem sounds in speech and language therapy. And our research in 2019 with teachers found that creativity was an area they would like to see studied more at primary school. And in fact, it was listed third, just behind problem solving and teamwork. And our follow-up research last year found that in business, for almost every industry, it is a combination of complex reasoning and creativity that are increasingly relevant. So the future workforce is all about people and technology working in harmony. However, worryingly, we found a lack of confidence right across the population, and in particular around the skills that are needed for the future. So 37% of young people surveyed, that's 18 to 24-year-olds, 37% said it's hard to learn new skills. And more than half of them believe that employers are not willing to invest in training for people like them. Now, our young population in Ireland should be a source of competitive advantage for us, but half of our young people were jobless at some point in the last year. And if you look at the latest CSO figures just published last week, it highlighted that nearly 2/3 of those between 15 and 24 who are not in education now are jobless. Now, it's not surprising when you think that many were employed in sectors that have suffered the most, so hospitality, food, retail, tourism. We need to pay attention to our youth. And if there's one positive from the last year, I think there is a new appetite for societal change. The uneven impact of the pandemic has highlighted inequalities, and so we do have an opportunity to reset and to build a balanced and an inclusive recovery. And I believe that to solve for Ireland, we need to come together to collaborate, public and private organisations, and really bring in diverse representation to reflect today's society, to help to build those skills across all segments of society. And I think our shared goal, and again, others have alluded to it today, it's not just to make learning available to everybody, of course that is primary, but also to make it available as a life cycle of continuous learning. And then there's one other area I want to highlight is really how creativity and engagement with the arts enhances business. So as you know, at Accenture, we've worked extensively with business to arts to build creative partnerships, and it's to develop a culture of belonging among our own diverse workforce, to help us to tackle big problems and to drive change. So, we've seen engagement with the arts can help to educate, develop empathy and understanding for the experience of others, and to communicate about what matters to us as a business and as a community. So if I think of examples like partnering with the Gays Film Festival, providing a platform for powerful LGBT stories to take centre stage, but also opening up a discussion for us about LGBT equality at work. Commissioning portraits of women on walls to help to bring attention to the underrepresentation of women in too many public spaces, but also prompting a new conversation about structural gender inequality. And if you look at the Business to Arts report just published last month, you'll see ample evidence of the positive impact that creative engagement has had on the well-being of people of all ages. There were more than 100 nominations for creative partnerships right across Ireland. So, I can speak for myself and for Accenture, the arts have sustained us all this past year. And I really want to applaud the work of Creative Ireland in supporting the development of creativity and indeed sponsoring participation in cultural and creative activity. As the Taoiseach said at the beginning, it is about well-being. It has promoted individual, community and national well-being. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm actually going to kind of begin and open up the discussion really with that last point that Michelle made. And I suppose I'm wondering from the educational perspective, to what degree the relationship between teaching creativity within the classroom is kind of integrated into the broader imperatives for well-being, which is beginning to shape the curriculum as well. So perhaps, Eileen, you might be able to speak about that.
Thanks, Sarah. And I suppose maybe, in direct response, the first point I would make is that when you look at curriculum developments in Ireland, I suppose we've had a very strong tradition of sectoral development. So we developed our Ashter framework 12 years ago. Our framework for junior cycle was 2015. And in those more recent curriculum developments, you see well-being absolutely centre stage in those curricula. And when you look at well-being in either the framework for junior cycle or in Ashter, you see multiple references to creativity. And I think that in itself is a recognition of that relationship that Michelle touched on between creativity and the contribution it can make to well-being. And I would agree with Michelle's point completely. If ever we needed evidence of that relationship, we saw it in the last 14 months. I think it's also interesting from a child voice, student voice perspective, that relationship between well-being and creativity as well. And I'm thinking of, in our work in developing curriculum, we actually work really closely with children and young people. So we ask for their ideas, their perspectives, as much as we ask teachers and industry and all of the other education partners. But when you ask children, and again, I'm thinking of young children, I'm thinking of students in post-primary, about the kinds of experiences that they want more of, that they enjoy in school, you'll hear them talk about things like they want experiences where they can work together. They want experiences where they can have a say, where they can bring their ideas to the fore, where they can communicate in multiple ways and share and work together. And a lot of that is coming, I think, from a place where those types of experiences leave children and young people, indeed leave us all, I think, feeling a sense of fulfillment and, I suppose, motivation and satisfaction, which ultimately contributes to well-being. And when you have that impact on your well-being, that feeds into pretty much everything else that you do and everything else that you learn, again, whether you're in an early years setting or a primary or post-primary school. So I think it's a really strong relationship between well-being and creativity, Sarah, and I think it's one that we're seeing more and more in curriculum development, as I said, within Ashter and the framework for junior cycle. But also now, as we look again at the primary curriculum and we look at senior cycle, as Anne mentioned, I think there are more opportunities there to kind of strengthen that connection between creativity and well-being.
Thank you. Anne, you spoke, I suppose, in some way about some of the challenges or that tension between perhaps nostalgia and the future. So I'm wondering how you find, whether you find this increased emphasis on creativity within teacher training and within the curriculum. Is that, how that is impacting upon the well-being of teachers, let's say, and whether it is something that kind of directly influences that tension that you see, where there is a slight fear, but also a slight liberation.
I think that's a really interesting point, and listening to Arlene's summary there, I mean, it's quite clear that as a system, even the Creative Ireland initiative, we're not short of the ideas. we're not short of these concepts. And that whole of system commitment to creativity that Andreas called out there is really unique to Ireland, and is something that that the rest of the world is looking at. Where we're not succeeding, I think, is turning those ideas into practice. And I think for teachers and for new teachers who embark on their professional journey as educators, on the first day that they come in as student teachers, the enthusiasm, the passion, the emotion, speaking to those people starting on their journey to become teachers, every single one of them wants to change the world. That is what they want to do. They want to change the world. They want to improve the lives of children and young people. And they're there themselves because somewhere along the way they were inspired similarly by a teacher. So they have this real drive to shape the lives of children and young people for good and to make a difference. And on the last day, I'm pleased to say, of their teacher education, when they graduate, there's a similar energy in the room. We keep that for them. But when you meet them 5 years down the road, now obviously they're older and they're wiser and they've had life experience as well, the degree to which the system that we put them into is making the most of that energy, is keeping it alive, is fueling that imaginative spark, I'm not convinced we're doing it as well as we could for our teachers. I think Andreas would probably agree that, that Ireland is one of the few countries that has this really untapped resource in a high quality teaching force, and a competitive entry to teacher education. It's not easy to get into a teacher education programme in Ireland, but we don't make the most of it. And I think that valuing our teachers and seeing the role of teachers in our path to a creative Ireland, not just in teaching music or teaching art, but in the teaching of maths and geography, in the way they role model for young people, I don't think we're making the most of it. Something Arlene and I were discussing earlier that really disappointed me about a government policy. If I know we're in positive mode here about the positivity around Creative Ireland, but the government is committed to teacher education in universities for good reason. Teachers need to know about research. They need to know about new ideas. And that leads to wonderful potential for interdisciplinarity, for example. So thanks to the support of Accenture, for example, some of our teachers end up doing an industry placement with a tech startup as part of their preparation for teaching, which is fantastic. But the government decided recently that new funding for universities would be tied to the Human Capital Initiative, which encouraged universities to develop new interdisciplinary programs based on transversal competencies and the new world of work and the new vision of the future. But it excluded teacher education programs from it because it said the focus on this innovation was on what industry needed. But every teacher is teaching the future workers. And I thought that was a big gap and a big mistake. And we just didn't recognise how critical teachers are to the creative and innovative ecosystem. So round 2 is coming up shortly of the Human Capital Initiative. So my fingers are crossed that teacher education will get included.
I suppose in some ways we seem to be asking our systems to become more flexible in that way and, to grow with us. And I suppose to some degree I look at, my own children going through the education system and wonder by the time their generation are coming around to training as teachers, whether that will be so embedded within their mentality that kind of, I suppose, holistic development of teachers, and whether it isn't until we see those, reap the benefits in the future. Andreas, I'm wondering from the, you spoke about the PISA scores and the importance of creativity and just in terms of how we're assessing that academically. I'm wondering, is well-being happening, are conversations about well-being happening within that context as well?
Absolutely. In fact, already the last PISA round attributed a lot of importance to actually also building good metrics on student well-being. And I want to echo the comment that was just made. There is such a close connection between the sense of well-being and the sense of agency and also co-agency that students have, the kind of sense of empowerment. And actually, that's what we are actually, when I talked about PISA growth mindset measures, those I think are very, very important, that we are succeeding to make those aspects visible. And of course, student well-being is very closely interconnected with teacher well-being. In a kind of, it's again, I don't think this creativity idea is so much connected to any specific subject. In fact, there is a danger if we just say, oh, this is about arts, everybody else can just continue. It is in every school subject. It is a matter of the learning environments that we create, how we sort of give space to students for project-based learning, where they can experiment, and give teachers a strong sense of professional autonomy. And I think that's what Irish teachers actually have, at least compared to teachers elsewhere. What is missing is the other element to this, and that's the collaborative culture. If you look actually to the most, flexible, open education systems, you really see that, it's not just about teacher training before you get into school, but the school is a place where everybody learns and everybody experiments. It's the students who learn, the teachers who learn, and every teacher is, an instructor, of course, but also a good mentor, a good coach, a good kind of facilitator, a good evaluator, a good designer of innovative learning environments. And I do think that's an area, I think, where probably Ireland can learn, certainly from some of the Nordic countries in Europe, but also from East Asia. I think if you look the recent effort, some of the countries there that used to be really on the other side of the extreme, just filling students up with knowledge, are now actually creating an amazing kind of set of learning environments to facilitate this. So that's what we are trying to make visible in the PISA metrics, because we know that this is not just the currency for the future, but also if you want young people to become lifelong, life-wide learners, they need to have that curiosity, that drive to continue to expand their horizon every day at the workplace, in society, in communities. And I think I would also say, the fact that our current metrics in education at the national level are not really reflecting creative thinking means that, we're giving teachers two messages. Develop creativity, we value this. And then we tell them, but at the end of the day, we're not going to count it. And I think we have to do better. We have to, create more holistic measures that look at student well-being and the creative aspects that are the ingredients of that.
I cannot believe we're actually under time pressure to finish already, but there is a kind of a key question that's come through the chat. And just for those of you who are using the chat function, all of this conversation will be recorded, including your own contributions. And I know there's somebody answering your questions as we speak, but I suppose one question, Andreas mentioned this idea of, that every student, and I suppose I'm wondering whether, what the feeling is about whether the idea of creative learning itself is something that is more inclusive than perhaps more traditional or nostalgic modes of learning, and also how I suppose how we feel the education system is fit to ensure that every child has equal access to creativity and participation in their culture.
I might maybe begin, Sarah. I mean, I suppose very quickly, what I would say is I agree completely with your point. I think when you have a culture, you have a classroom where creativity is really at the heart of the practice in that classroom, that's an inclusive classroom, because that allows every child to bring their voice, their individuality, their perspective to bear on what's going on in the classroom. I mean, I mentioned earlier about kind of a couple of really exciting curriculum developments ahead around the redevelopment of the primary curriculum, and inclusion sits at the very heart of that. So, I mean, I think that's an opportunity to respond very positively to that question. As well. And just to finish, maybe, I mean, we ran an initiative a couple of years ago on coding, and I know coding is one of the priorities of Creative Ireland as well. And I remember on the final day of sitting just around chatting to the teachers, and these were teachers from, right across different types of schools. I remember when I kind of asked them, what struck them when they thought back on the coding initiative. And I remember the teachers all agreed that from an inclusion perspective, because the initiative gave opportunities for children to lead their own learning, they were driving what happened in those classes. They felt that from an inclusion perspective, every single child excelled in that classroom. And it was just interesting, there was no hinting or prompting being done. For them, it was about inclusion. And I think for me, that was really concrete evidence of that connection between creativity and how it can absolutely support inclusion of all young people.
Well, I deeply regret that it's actually time to finish already, but I suppose we would be remiss if we didn't have some sort of a reflection here today of students' voices themselves. Obviously, it's a school day, and to boot, it is Creative Schools Week, one of the initiatives run by Creative Ireland, so we don't have children here present with us today to speak. But we do have a lovely video that's been put together by the Creative Ireland team in which we can hear about what a difference creativity is making to children, both within the classrooms and outside of the classrooms. Thank you.
Everybody's creative in their own way.
Could be in maths, English, story making, cookery, anything really. You just need imagination really.
You could be free with it. It is something that you might make someone happy. That's art because you're creating a happy person.
I dance in the kitchen on my own. Move to the cooking, I burn.
The wheelchair makes a mark that comes off the wheels. And it makes a wet mark that makes a little line. You never know, you can make something interesting if you keep going like that. Now, it's not all fancy art that someone would paint. No, but it's still art. That was very cool. So now I'm going to do it with paint.
And know how we ran.
I make films because I absolutely love it.
Away from my troubles. And know how we do.
For me, art is like my escape world. It powers me and like energizes me.
I dance in the kitchen on my own. Move to the cooking, I burn for you. Hoping one day you'll come home. Can't taste the love on the phone.
I love you.
I dance in the kitchen on my own. And know how we dance through the garden all night. And know how we dance away in our bubble.
It makes you like happy. Because when you're doing it, it puts you in a good mood.
Like it clears your mind. Because you get too excited and you just want to go to school. You can't miss it.
We are the creative nation.
My advice for everyone who says their art is bad, no art is bad. Every single art in the world is good. No matter what you draw, it's amazing.
I hadn't done acting before, but right now as I'm doing the acting, it's just fun and I get an experience of doing new stuff. It's just helping my creativity and my talents.
I finally had something to express all the feelings I had and all the talents I wanted to showcase to the world.
Do you like performing? I love it. And I really like singing because it helps me calm down if I'm ever angry. When I do like artistic projects, it does make me want to come into school because I get excited to present them and like just express myself and like whatever.
It made me feel excited that we were doing a cookbook.
We all love cooking, don't we, guys?
We do, yes.
Yes. Everyone gets to learn what cooking means.
Every monster is different. Every human is different. Are you all set for the Kaylee in the kitchen? Yes!
I learned to go outside the box and to have fun and to enjoy yourself and don't worry what other people think and to follow your dreams.
It's a great pleasure to join you here today for the Creative Youth Conference 2021. The theme of this year's conference, Creativity, the connection to our future now, is one that captures the creative ideals of our young people and provides the scope for the inclusion of every young person in an ever-changing world. I'd like to thank Tanya Bonatti and her brilliant team in Creative Ireland for all the work to ensure this conference could happen despite the many obstacles that appeared before them. And I'm delighted to see so many people in attendance this afternoon. And let me take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining this conference. All of us here today are united by our commitment to ensuring the best for our children and our young people. I welcome the words earlier on from An Taoiseach and Minister Foley, who both share my belief that children and young people need to be afforded both inclusive opportunities for creative engagement and for their views to be considered in shaping those opportunities. And I know Minister Catherine Martin, who will be speaking later on, will be echoing those same sentiments. I know you all will agree that hearing the voices of just some of the young people who have benefited from Creative Ireland initiatives has been one of the many highlights today. Ensuring that the voices of young people and children are not just heard, but are listened to is an important aspect of the work in my department. In April, I was delighted to launch the National Framework for Children and Young People's Participation in Decision-Making. This framework gives guidance to people who work with children and young people on the best practice of including their views. For a long time in this country, young people didn't really have a voice, particularly when it came to politics, when it came to public policy. In my view, that made Ireland a darker and more difficult place. Children and young people have a view on the forces that shape their lives, and those views must be listened to and they must be valued. We know from listening to children and young people that there are many challenges for them in their everyday lives, and they are using their voices to articulate their views on climate action, on mental health services, and of course, on the ongoing COVID-19 situation. And I think we all know that COVID-19 has affected us all in many different ways, but it has also created an immensely challenging time for our young people. Young people told us about their experiences of living with COVID-19 in the How's Your Head Young Voices During COVID-19 report. Young people told us they want more services and opportunities to be afforded to them, and more collaboration through a whole of society approach. We know that they felt acute isolation that has come with the COVID-19 restrictions. I think we've all felt that same sense of claustrophobia this year throughout the lockdowns, and often separated from our family and our friends. While there is always more that can be done, we are making strides to meeting the needs of our young people in an endeavour to reconnect and recover from COVID-19. This year, in response to the difficult times children have experienced because of the pandemic, we will be launching the Let's Play Ireland campaign for 2021. With a focus on supporting children's reconnection and recovery in a summer of play. We want children and young people to be supported in getting out, meeting friends, and most importantly, having fun. The launch of the first 5 Little Library, announced just last Friday, kick-started this campaign. As our libraries reopened on Monday, all 330 libraries across the country have been stocked with a first 5 Little Library, ready to be collected by more than 4,500 early learning and care settings nationally. These resources will be available again in October, encouraging a love of books, stories and reading amongst our youngest children. In addition, a whole series of other exciting initiatives will roll out over the coming days and weeks, all of them focusing on play. Later this summer, we will have the National Play Day, and I'm delighted to say that this year I will be allocating additional funding to local authorities for that, supporting a variety of innovative and inclusive projects to celebrate and encourage play throughout the country. The Capital Grant Scheme for Play this year attracted applications from all 31 local authorities for a range of projects, from wheelchair accessible swings to learning to cycle spaces, cable runways and sensory gardens. I will also be announcing details of funding for the Parent and Toddler Group Initiative and the Outdoor Play Capital funding later on this month. I think we all realise that this has been an incredibly difficult year for children and young people, and as a government, we have a responsibility to support them as we move to reopen the country. I hope that through the Let's Play campaign, we can support young people to get back out there, reconnect with their friends, with nature, and of course with the arts. I'm reminded of something the author Kurt Vonnegut wrote, which is that the arts are a very human way of making life more bearable. Practicing an art, no matter how well or badly, is a way to make your soul grow. Creative Ireland have done tremendous work at supporting young people in that, creating programs to unlock the creative potential of young people, enabling them to actively and fully engage in cultural life and the arts, as is their right. Looking to the future, I'm excited to see the fantastic work of Creative Ireland continuing. I welcome the collaboration of so many passionate and talented people to support positive outcomes for the young people of Ireland. I look forward to the panel facilitated by Sarah again with what promises to be a really engrossing discussion. Bo Sternia Thompson, Roddy Doyle, Helene Hugel, and Professor Linda Doyle are sure to provide a really fascinating insight. Thank you all for being here today and for inviting me to be part of such a really, really wonderful event.
Thank you, Minister. It was great to hear the emphasis on the word play throughout your speech, which I know our first contributor today, Bo, is, from the Lego Foundation, is going to speak a little bit to us about the research that the Lego Foundation have been doing in relation to the importance of play, both in the well-being of the child, but also as the lifelong learner. Thank you, Bo.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting this incredibly important and exciting discussion and to inject some optimism into our current state with the example you just shared. So the core mission of the Lego Foundation is to redefine play and reimagine learning because there's such an untapped potential in how children naturally learn and in which way it develops their creative thinking, but also their well-being and ability to keep learning throughout a lifetime. So creating this environment that supports creativity and lifelong learning through actively engaging experiences with play and creativity is actually the greatest opportunity we have, not only to reimagine our education systems, but also to truly empower children and youth to create a much more diverse and inclusive society. And why is it like that? It's because from the research we know that success in life, whether you think about individual well-being or flourishing, or whether one thinks about your contributions or participation in community, or whether one thinks about these new skills we talk about, whether it's creativity or critical thinking, or it's this ongoing interest and the confidence and ability to keep learning, they all rely on the basic characteristics of being actively engaged through play, through creative experiences throughout childhood. So the ability to think flexibly, to address uncertainty, is not in opposition to knowledge and expertise, but it relies on children's confidence in creativity and learning. So our work in the Lego Foundation we're working across more than 30 countries on systemic impact. We're working with international organizations on making creativity, social, emotional, physical skills an integrated part of the approach. And I must say, as someone with a perspective from the outside of the education systems and into the discussion you're having right now in Ireland, you are doing an extraordinary work. Like, if you could share this widely and deeply, it would be extremely interesting and inspiring to the international community, particularly the way you have a shared interest and commitment across the ministries, the way you work across the industry, the education, the culture, the community, and in which way, which we just heard right now, you inherently listen to, you participate, and you empower children and youth to share and come up with examples. So from our research work with international partners over the decades, there's a few key points that stand out in terms of the importance of play for creativity and for learning. First one is that play in the early years lasts a lifetime. So when children are playful in the early years, when they manipulate materials, when they are curious and explore the environment, when they touch and feel and express themselves, it's not only about social emotional skills, regulating stress, develop resilience and collaboration, but it is a foundation for school and last into adulthood. Play, secondly, is also an inclusive practice. It includes children. We have a recent study which summarizes evidence from across 25 interventions, 18 countries, that illustrates that if children are exposed to free and guided forms of play in the early years, it's actually an equalizer. It helps children to come up at the same level of children from disadvantaged backgrounds to catch up with children from more advanced backgrounds who have more time and support and materials. So not instruction, but having children to express themselves, to manipulate things, to be curious, to move around. Thirdly, education actually already has some examples of creativity and play embedded in it. So we did a comprehensive review of educational approaches in school a while back, and it illustrates that if children are actually engaged in creating projects, engaged in inquiry, in experiential learning, working in experience with the communities, addressing real life problems, it not only address real life knowledge and understand knowledge and concepts, it also develops skills. But the most important is it sustains their interest in keep learning, keep enjoying exploring the world. So play and education through creative learning is actually a practice that's very well recognized and can be scaled now. And finally, what we see also right now is technology can actually be an enabler. The creative use of technologies can be an awakening if it's more active, it's more social, it's more diverse use of technologies. Then we can more reshape assessments, and we can have strong collaborations between the home, the school, and the community environment. So finally, just to say that, if you can cultivate the creative opportunities that you are already on your journey to do right now, it is the single most important thing we can do to develop a breadth of skills among children and build, inherently about their well-being to be creative, engaged, lifelong learners. And I think one thing to keep in mind is, for systems as we go forward, is there's not just one way of doing this. Creativity and play inherently emphasizes an opportunity for different ways of doing things. So instead of one way of being, or one way of living, or one way of succeeding in life, creativity means it's a mindset that there's plenty of different ways to support this from a systems level. There's not only one outcome for learning or for education, but a breadth of different competencies, and to be adaptable. There's not just one way of doing assessment. Actually, there's a palette of ways to document, to share, to discuss. There's not only one setting in which you learn in the classroom, in the school, but as much outdoor, being active with the community, using the creative institutions and the libraries. There's not only one way of expressing yourself, whether it's through verbally or pen and paper, but through music and arts and movement and technology. And there is, most importantly maybe, not only one way of teaching, because what we have seen from our research is the truly impact pedagogies are combining instruction with open-ended projects, guidance towards difficult challenges, and a variety of different types of games. So it builds on children's agency, their choices, and their joy of learning. So such a richness and great opportunities to build on in the future work here. So thank you again for creating this opportunity to come together to enable these opportunities and to support the curiosity and the passion and the imagination of children, of young people, and also adults, I hope, because we know this is what represents the greatest long-term value for our society, regardless of where you are from, your background or your personality. Thank you.
Thank you, Bo. I was really struck by what you said about this idea of play as an equalizer, and particularly as our next contributor, Roddy Doyle, a former teacher and now writer, has been a really important advocate in using creative writing as a way of creating more equal opportunities for young people. So I'm going to pass it over to Roddy to introduce his work. Thank you.
I'm involved. I'm the co-founder and the chair of an organisation called Fighting Words. And we were established in 2009. And our goal, or our hope, was to make creative writing, fiction, poetry, plays, anything involving words, as inviting and as doable to children and young people as we possibly could. I think the blank page is it's almost a symbol of or for the future, because it frightens people very often, but it's also a great opportunity. And where we began to see the road we should take, the route we should use, we had a big screen and a group of early school leavers. They were involved in a scheme in East Wall. They were from the East Wall area and Sheriff Street on the north side of Dublin. Young women. They were very keen to write a story, but they didn't know how to go about it. And they'd all left school early. They didn't have much confidence in themselves as far as words and putting words together and being creative was concerned. And they came to our centre in Russell Street in Dublin. And they sat in a semicircle in front of the screen. And they told us a bit about what they wanted to do. They wanted 4 characters, the same age as themselves. They had names for the characters, but they didn't really know how to start. So what we suggested was that 2 of them stand up and pretend they were 2 of the fictional characters and just give us a bit of dialogue. And they wouldn't stand up. They said they were too shy to do it. I mean, the least shy people I've ever met in my life, but they said they were too shy. So 2 of them, and I remember their names, this was going back 12 years, Hayley and Emer, started talking. And a woman, a volunteer with us, typed out as quickly as she could what they were saying on the screen. So we had this belt of dialogue going down the screen. And the women who were talking, but also those who were listening to them and watching it, just loved what they were seeing. They absolutely loved it. They started laughing and pointing as they saw their own words going up on the screen. And we let that go for about 2 minutes, you know. And being Dublin women, they got a lot said, you know, and it was all great. And then, first of all, we started seeing, you know, did they actually say that? And they started actually, you know, pointing out where the inaccuracies were, or where something wasn't spelt right now and again. So we mopped that up. And then one of them, I'll never forget it, Hayley said, I wouldn't say that. And somebody said, what? And she got up and pointed at a line on the screen. She said, I wouldn't say that. And another woman said, you did say that. Yeah, she said, but I want to change it. And I think it was me. I said, well, what do you want to change it to? And she said, can I do that? And I said, yeah, of course you can. So she changed what the sentence was. And again, they were all delighted with it. They absolutely delighted. And by the end of the session, they realized that you don't have to just write down the page in a hurry because the teacher says your time is up or you're doing an exam and everything, everything has to be measured in the number of words that you write. But they realize you can write up the page as well. You can go back to the top and start changing a character name. You can decide where to put the location for the story, maybe at the very beginning of the story or halfway through it or not at all. They also decided whether to write in the past tense or the present tense and the strengths and the weaknesses of both approaches. And that particular group of women came to us then about once every fortnight, and they had a book, you know, like a big copybook, and Hayley was in charge of it, and they used to use their lunchtimes to write in it. And then they put it up on the screen and they all judged it and made changes. Basically, they edited their own work. Reality then got in the way because, you know, luckily some of them got work and another had a child. So that particular group of women stopped before they got to the end of the story. And I've met Hayley since, and she's always like, she uses the same local supermarket as I do, and she's always saying she'll finish it, and I hope she does. But that's basically the approach we take with all kids, particularly at second level. Give them a piece, you know, 15-year-old, 16-year-old transition year students. If you give them, for example, a situation where 2 characters, one of them has won 2 tickets for a gig, and the other one thinks he or she is getting the other ticket, and get them to talk about that for a couple of minutes, put it up on the screen, it lights up the room. They love it. I've never seen it not work in the 12 years we've been doing it. And what happens quite quickly, because they've made this story up themselves and they realize they have license to write whatever they want, is that they claim ownership of it quickly, but collectively, but then quite quickly, there's no agreement. They don't want to write the thing together. So they all, at a certain point, it stops being collective and all the kids start writing their own stories. And it never fails to work. It's quite extraordinary. They absolutely love it. So that use of the screen has been, it was a revelation because it was part of our weaponry, but we didn't realize just how central it would come. So we started off then working with primary and secondary school kids in this one centre on the north side of Dublin, very close to Croke Park. And we have now centres throughout the island. East Belfast was the second one to open. We're in Cork, we're in Wexford, we're in Limerick, we're in Clare. I was recently did a Zoom session with a group of secondary school kids from Clare. We're in the Midlands. We're in Wicklow, Donegal, Derry. I can never remember them all. We're in partnerships with the libraries, which has worked out brilliantly. So Wexford Library, Friday morning, there's a session in a room that works very, very well. And the librarians are actually the volunteers. They're the experts there, which is terrific. And so it's grown from strength to strength. And what I like particularly is that I think it has a big influence on the teachers. It's incredible how many times over the last 12 years I've encountered a teacher of English who says that they're not creative. It's as if they've been told that they're not creative and they don't recognize it in themselves. So at this stage we're hoping to train the teachers. We are actually doing sessions with teachers to open up the openness. The thing about the current system in Ireland, the current state, the school system, is that you do end up with a sense that the only thing that matters is the last couple of weeks of the child's education, the leaving cert. Everything else becomes irrelevant. And it's all about rote learning and getting stuff on pages as quickly as you possibly can. And some are really good at it and some aren't. Some never get there. But what we are doing is trying to influence teachers into seeing the openness. If you plan a story too meticulously, it'll never come to life. There has to be the unknown. There has to be the willingness to change your mind, to abandon it, maybe start something better, to keep on at it and at it and at it. And I think when the kids have ownership of the story, they have the resilience and the tenacity to keep going. It's so rare that somebody just abandons and says, I don't want to do it anymore. They just keep at it and at it and at it, as they learn that every problem is fixable and doable, and the problems are often just practical little things about deleting a word or adding a word, and they're not kind of mysterious. They're all these children have thousands of words in their arsenal, and they can use them all or just a tiny proportion of them, you know. So I'm not sure how long I've been talking, Sarah, but I don't have enough.
What you've been saying has been really interesting in terms of reflecting some of the conversation we were having in the first session about, I suppose, creativity and flexibility and openness, and how those sort of conversations allow us to have that flexibility and how the classroom might adapt to that.
Yeah. I don't want to suggest that I'm central to this thing, but I suppose it's personal in a way, because I was a teacher in the 80s and into the 90s for 14 years, and I began to write at about the same time, and I found that the deeper I went into the writing world, there was a disconnect between what I was doing in the school, in my teaching, and getting kids ready for the inter-cert and then the junior cert and the leaving cert, and what I was doing at home when I was working. And I found as I began to, 1991, for example, I had published 3 novels. 2 plays had been produced in Dublin. I'd co-written the script of The Commitments, which was just released that year. And yet I couldn't use any of that experience in the classroom. It was because kids doing honours English never wrote fiction. And I know from personal experience, family experience, that even recently, the option to write a story in the Leaving Cert, I think, might have been there, but kids were discouraged from doing it because it's harder to mark, as if everything was down to marks. A very warped, skewed version of objectivity, I think. So that's where I think Fighting Words at its core is just to make writing as doable for everybody, a joy, that creativity, not just passively reading or watching, but actually creating, and that everybody has the ability to do this to their own level and beyond expectation.
Thank you. You've raised some really interesting points, and hopefully we'll pick up on some of them again in the discussion. So we're going to move to Hélène Hugel from Helium Arts, who's going to introduce the work of your organisation. Thank you, Hélène.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So Helium Arts is the National Children's Arts and Health Organisation, and we work to support children up to the age of 18 living with long-term health conditions, and they can be conditions anywhere from epilepsy to diabetes to rare conditions, etc. Our creative program takes place in both outpatients hospitals, in the community, and now online. So according to the Growing Up in Ireland report, 11% of children in Ireland are living with a long-term health condition. And as you can imagine, these children face a lot of challenges, including increased stress and anxiety. They feel very lonely and socially isolated. And in particular, they can feel very defined by their condition. And on top of that then, these children miss out on a lot of normal, everyday activities, even days at school, out of school activities that could actually, if they had the chance to participate, could support them through some of these challenges that they face. So Helium Arts, we provide a creative community where these children can meet, they can join and be with children who are going through the same experiences. They can be creative and learn how to be creative, express their ideas and emotions that they're going through in a creative and artistic way. They make lifelong friends, and they also make lifelong skills. So, I suppose, what's the value in that? I mean, I think we can understand that that creativity really empowers children. I've heard the word joy used so many times here already today. It provides connection, particularly for our children, a sense of belonging, imagination. But I suppose, where's the real value in that? And we have interrogated that just recently in a recent social return on investment study we've just published this week. And as part of that study, we reached out to parents and we asked them to put a monetary value on the benefits of our program for their children. And we listed something like from about 100 up to 1,000 euro. Which would they pick? And about 25% of parents actually created their own monetary value, which was priceless. And they circled it. And in the margin of the questionnaire, they kind of wrote us little notes like, how do I put a value? How do I put a value in my child's well-being? Or how could I afford what your program has given my child? And I have to say, this was very unexpected. It was heartwarming. It was a very different kind of data that we were expecting. And I suppose it really speaks to that, that slightly untouchable, unmeasurable, innate quality creativity brings to all our lives. And yet, we work in arts and health. We engage with the health service. We have to find a way of measuring what we do. So, we're often asked, where is the science? And we need to have a reply to that. So, through this social return on investment study, we can now speak to data which says that our program in particular demonstrates that 90% of children have an increased sense of well-being, 90% experience a decrease in social isolation, 100%, though all the children have experienced an increase in creativity, and interestingly, about 68% can also report that creativity has actually helped them to cope with their condition. And I'd like to just take a moment before I finish to share a story with you. And it's a story that I think really helps to illustrate the potential of the longer-term impact of this data. It's a story, I'd actually like to read it because it's the words of a parent who felt compelled to write to us 12 months into the program. Her child had been participating over that year, and she sort of had a realization of the value of the program, and she wrote to us. And I remember the day. It was a grey February morning, and this email arrived in my inbox, and it certainly brought me joy. So I'll just read it out to you. My daughter has participated in your program over the past 12 months, and today I realized the true value of the program. My daughter is very anxious when she attends her medical appointments. And normally when we arrive in the waiting room, she takes out her music and puts on her headphones. She speaks to no one, and she rarely comes in to see her consultant. But today, as we walked into the waiting room, she recognized your artist at the arts table. So this is also the artist she would have been working with in the community. And she quickly took up a seat. She had a great time and was more relaxed while waiting. Then, when it was her turn to see the consultant, this time she went into the clinic room and she had a full conversation. And she appeared much more relaxed than usual. So what this story tells me is that this is a child who has found her independence, she's found her confidence and her self-esteem, and she's found her voice through the creative process. And through that, and what I can see, and I know it's only anecdotal, but that has, obvious benefits to her self-development and also to her physical health, because this child has become an agent in her own self-care. She has set herself on a pathway towards what the health system calls self-management of a chronic condition. And this has not only benefits for her, but it also has a cost benefit to the health service. So indirectly, a child who grows into a confident adult, who's interested in looking after their health, is going to require less resources from the health service in the future. This is only an anecdote, it's only a story currently, but I really think it demonstrates a true potential. It demonstrates that this creative work that takes place in the community can have future impact, positive impact on the health service. And finally, just to conclude, there's a lot of talk also today about connections, and connections are so important. And the World Health Organization published a report on arts and health in 2019, and they emphasized the importance of strengthening these pathways across sectors. So between arts, health, social care, and for us in particular, children, that we need to strengthen these pathways, because it's only through doing that we are going to find the creative solutions that are ultimately going to impact these children in the future.
Thank you, Helene. I think as your testimony has just shown, and as we saw reflected in the lovely video where the children were speaking, and in Roddy's words as well, that's relationship between creativity, enabling the child's voice, and agency is just almost can't be stated enough. I'm really struck by what you were talking about, this idea of strengthening pathways across two, I suppose, areas or disciplines that might not necessarily be connected, arts and health. So I'm delighted to welcome, I believe, the world's only Professor of Engineering and the Arts and Provost-elect of Trinity, Linda Doyle, to speak. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. So I suppose I'd really just like to talk about 2 points in this context. So the first is a more general point, and I've listened to the really heart-warming examples here, but I think if we're to make kind of full and systematic progress in this space, we need to put creative arts practices on an equal footing with other disciplines. And from my perspective, that is not always the case. So I just want to give one very simple example from my own world. So I used to run a research centre. It was an engineering research centre that looked at the future networks and technologies. And when I think about research, I think about us having a toolbox about how you might tackle your research. So you open that toolbox and there could be, mathematical modelling, various different experimentation techniques, various different data analytics that you can use. So over time, I introduced artists and designers into that engineering space who brought, I suppose, creative arts practice methods that were added to the toolbox. But still, when I stand back, that's not given equal respect or equal, I suppose, validation. And you can see that in so many different ways. You can see it, something I talk quite a lot about what is epistemic injustice, the kind of privileging of certain knowledge making over others. You can see it practically through funding. It's much easier to get funding for some of the kind of STEM and technical oriented things than it's for the arts practice, the creative arts practice. And I always felt, to a certain extent, even though we made progress, that it was still smuggled in around the edges. And I'd go back, I suppose, to a lot of what people were saying earlier today. When you look at the problems the world faces, especially the very complex problems, whether it's climate change, whether it's pandemics, the solution to those lies in a very multifaceted approach. But that multifaceted approach can only be facilitated when there is, I suppose, equal respect given for the different disciplines that play a role in it. So that's something that's, I think, very, very important. And when I was thinking about the planned national framework for children and young people, I think one of the best things it could do is to start out by saying this, whether you want to call it a discipline or a range of disciplines, that creative arts practices is on an equal footing to others. So that to me is a first point. Then the second point I just want to make, and it goes back to the technology piece. So when we see young people today, I think often we think they're amazing with technology. A lot of kids now, it's second nature to use technology. But to me, that does not mean you're technically literate. And what I think is hugely important in the world we live in is that you are. And the reason I say that is because we're hugely controlled by technology. We're controlled by technology we see and we don't see. And the politicians today and decision makers increasingly have to make technical decisions. So what's this got to do with creative arts practice, you might say? So for me, creative arts practice is a way of interrogating the technology in the world around us. It's a way of seeing what's invisible and bringing it to light. Lots of artists that I work with are kind of fearless in that pursuit. I think there's a training that comes with it that really understands power and power relationships, who's included and excluded, and that's really, really important. And I've been thinking about that in the context of the notion of well-being that's been discussed here a lot. And when I think about well-being for me is about having a say. You can't have a say if you don't see what's happening to you, and you can't have a say if you don't have the words, as you were talking about, Roddy. And to me, creative arts practices is a way of allowing you to see what's happening in the technological world, a way into it for many who may not come in as engineers or computer scientists, and it's a way of finding that voice. So for both those reasons, I think that for me, bringing together these two topics are really, really important, but ultimately, underneath it all, it's about an equality of respect for different disciplines. And fundamentally, I think everything we're talking about today needs that for it to continue, rather than there have to be a continued, I suppose, justification of why creative arts practices would be included or is important or has value.
Thank you, Linda. That's really fascinating and actually kind of dovetails with some of the issues that we were discussing in the education panel. And I suppose as Anne Looney was expressing her own disappointment that teacher training wasn't going to be included in the new tertiary interdisciplinary model, so that teachers were not going to be allowed to practice within other disciplinaries. And it seems to me that's a very missed opportunity to have a more, to foster a broader culture of disciplinary inclusivity within our schools for young people if teachers don't have those, don't have access to that kind of vocabulary or interdisciplinary language.
Exactly. As we all know, I mean, your opportunities are set in motion from a very early age, and you start to develop, I suppose, preconceived notions about what, about different disciplines, about what you should be or what you're allowed to be. So I think it's really, really important that these kind of things are bedded in very early, and that equality of status of the kinds of disciplines that we're talking about today.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that's come up in everybody's kind of introductory remarks is the idea of technology as increasingly important in young people's lives, but also a way of giving them a vocabulary or giving them agency, and that, rather than some, a threat perhaps to their creativity. I'm wondering, Bo, whether you could speak to that in terms of some of the research that LEGO have been doing about technology and its potential for enabling creativity within young people.
Absolutely. I think that's a question on top of mind of most people these days, particularly with the remote distance learning opportunities. So what we've done is, first and foremost, to study how children use technologies. We did a large-scale study across England and South Africa to look at very cultural diverse opportunities using GoPro cameras, focus groups, interviews, observations, surveys. The first thing is, children use technologies in amazing diverse ways right now. It's not really a discussion of screen or non-screen. They really take mobile phones outdoor, they socialize, they create projects, they share, discuss, and express themselves. So that's kind of the first overall finding. That actually a fluid way of using technologies across areas. And then there are particular benefits which we see are growing when we look at the particular things that children develop. Right now, they develop knowledge, they develop particular technical skills, but they also develop social emotionally if we think about technologies as much more about a social practice. So not, engaging with, passively engaging with screens, but more how they converse, they chat, they document, they share things. Secondly, that technologies that you really test and try out ideas with. So similar to the examples we heard here, many of the practices that exist in arts and engineering, you can take to technologies using creative platforms. So test and trying out things, creating stories, creatively coding, sharing projects, commenting on each other's work. So this ability to personalize and children to drive their own experiences, not being just, instructed or just looking passively at video is a new practice. And then I think thirdly, the adult engagement with technologies is critical. So what we've seen is that children learn massively about technology in itself, particularly when you have opportunities to discuss it with adults. So now a parent sitting next to a child discussing, what are we doing? What are the challenges here? How did that work? Because that really gets you a deeper understanding of the opportunities, but also the barriers of technology. And finally, what we do see is in these studies, there's such a need for more diversity in the way we design technologies and the way we include children and youth in developing these. Most of technologies and platforms are really generated with one culture, race, ethnicity, or gender in mind. And we need to broaden our opportunities for children to express themselves using technology. So there are great examples of these different types of platforms. And if we use these platforms, the creative platforms, we can have a different take on assessment. We can have a much more higher engagement of children, more choices, more agency. But it's really about this relationship between adults and children to discuss and use these technologies.
Thank you, Bo. Helene, I'm wondering to what extent technology has been a really integral part of reaching children throughout this particular period of time.
Yes, we actually, pre-pandemic, had been experimenting with using technology to connect some of the children we work with. And in particular, we worked with a group of children with cystic fibrosis because they can't actually physically meet due to cross-infection issues. So we'd actually spent time pre-pandemic exploring the possibilities around this. So we were, in some ways, prepared. So during the pandemic, what we did is we took some of this learning and we looked at how could we apply this to younger children, because at that time we were working with teenagers. And we also asked ourselves, how could we bring the tangible alongside, the technology? So to be honest, we actually went with a kind of a hybrid approach. And we also used the post because for us, of course, there's the tactile part of creativity. There's the sense of surprise. There's the physical sense. So the children would receive packages in the post and materials, but they'd also created artwork with each other through the post. So that was a really strong element for us. But the technology piece then that we used was also an added where they would actually then meet each other online through Zoom connections and share the work that they created, and that also created excitement. So I think for us, the use of technology, we will continue to use technology and incorporate our remote program going forward. Very important because we've actually been able to reach many parents living rurally who otherwise would not be able to participate. But we feel that in relation to the children we work with, that there's also a physicality that's important, and the social connections that we want to bring to that alongside the technology.
Okay, thank you. Roddy, I might ask you the same question, just in terms of the use of technology to reach communities, and whether in fact it's provided an opportunity for greater accessibility and a greater reach for fighting words, this new online model that we all exist.
But in some ways it has, because we can, because the reach is longer, I suppose. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you can reach more people. But what became immediately apparent to me was access, you know. I was doing a session with the transition year group, and I was on an iPad, so I was being brought from desk to desk. It was a weird experience in a way, the first time I'd done it. And I should have had travel sickness pills or something like that, because it was, you know, I was being whooshed around the place. It was great. I mean, it was hugely enjoyable. And these, you know, each kid would sit in front of me and we'd chat. But what became apparent when they were talking about how, you know, how well their stories were going and how far they'd gone, a lot of them didn't have, these were kids from, say, a working class, lower middle class area of North Dublin. A lot of them didn't have immediate access to a tablet. They had to wait. Either there was none in the house at all, or they had to wait their turn, or their mother was using the, you know, the laptop, the family laptop for work, because she had to work at home. So for various reasons, either nothing at all in the house, or, you know, one tablet among 4 siblings or something like that, that they didn't have the access that might be the case in other households. So that really, to me, is a huge challenge for those that want to overcome it, is that we have to make sure that if technology, and it has to be, is going to be part of the education system, that everybody, every child has to have proper access to it.
I think that again kind of echoes some of the questions that were coming through in the last session, the idea of access. I'm just wondering, Helene mentioned in her speech, you know, that as they were talking about the impact of well-being on the children living with long-term health issues, you know, and somebody said, well, you know, well, where's the science? And I'm wondering, Linda, is there science, you know, you might know coming from the kind of scientific and engineering perspective, you know, is there science about the I suppose, concrete evidence about kind of the impact of this, of bringing these two sections together?
Oh, I mean, well, every topic in the world, there's research done in it. But I think, you know, I think there's plenty of work in all sorts of different forms. There's both academics who delve deeply, but there's also, you know, one organisation I'm involved with is the Festival of Curiosity, so run by Vince McCarthy and Ellen Byrne, and what they do at the end of every year when they have the festival, that they will do research into the impact of that festival and, you know, gather the data from it. So it's a kind of normal way that people behave these days. I suppose we live in a world where we're constantly expected to justify the value of what we do, so it's become incorporated into a huge amount of what people do. But can I just add a couple of other things there? That one thing, and I was struck by when Ellen said it, I think one thing that creative arts practice brings to technology, it brings to everything. So artists are great at appropriating things, taking stuff and using it in a way that wasn't intended. And I think you see the same, I think, in how people use technology. But what I was completely struck by is you used the term post. You were talking about the post as being a technology. And I think that's the really important thing with this, that we don't just think of technology as something to do with an iPad or a computer, and we think about it as what's being the most appropriate in the context that's needed. And some of the artists, actually, I'm very influenced by, there's a woman called Fiona Dunn in the UK, and she uses technology as a catalyst to tease you in, and then the technology goes. You know, so the technology is the teaser that starts the conversation or brings you to a location that you've never been before or makes you think of something different. And then you forget about it in a lot of the work that she does, right? And to me, when we talk about how we use technology in that context, I think it's really important to be mindful of what Bo said about that, you know, a lot of things are designed for a particular culture. I think it's really important to be mindful that technology takes all forms, including more old-fashioned technologies, and it's really to be mindful of where it stops and starts of how you use it in the process.
Thank you, Linda. Once again, we're coming to the end of our session very quickly. There's a question here in the chat box that I'd like to get to, but just to say, for those of you using the chat function, all of those questions are being recorded. Continue to feed them in, and they're all going to be part of, I suppose, the broader conversation of this conference. I suppose one of our watchers or our audience today is wondering how we can support agencies to engage with young people in more creative ways. Pardon?
In the case of Fighting Words.
Yeah.
Volunteer.
Volunteer, okay.
Yeah. It's fightingwords.ie.
Volunteer,
Yeah.
get more experience.
Get more experience, enjoy it. If you have an hour a week, if you've got a day a week, an hour a month, there's a level or a job that would be made for you. It would be brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. Linda, yeah?
I'm just saying, I'd say pay artists properly. And I think that's a huge amount to do with this. And if you do that, and you don't expect creative arts practices to constantly be free, and I don't mean that in any, I think volunteering is a different angle, but if you don't expect this constantly to be free, you open up a totally different world for so many people, and that's a big issue, I feel.
Yeah.
I think with the cross-agency approach, and particularly if there's, I think partnership is so important, but even, a small partnership between, an agency like an early years setting and an artist. So I think what I would suggest is, yes, find an artist. And there are now, I think written into action plans and local frameworks. So whether that's Healthy Ireland, which I know has just happened there recently, recent action plan, there's policy now where, funding can now be used to support, creative activity in a variety of agencies, and they don't have to be arts or creative agencies. So I think there are ways of finding resources and just to look for them. I think certainly reach out to the local arts officer, because they always would be very open to supporting.
I think we might have time for one more question here, and it's actually, I suppose, coming back to something that Roddy spoke about it at the start in his presentation, this idea of allowing space and time for creativity, drafting and redrafting, making and remaking in order to foster creativity. I'm just wondering to what sense, I suppose it comes back to the idea of flexibility again, that has kind of been an overriding theme of both the discussions. This sense of kind of needing to make room for the spontaneous, and how you can plan to make room for the spontaneous, or how you can develop structures to make room for the spontaneous within that.
We're actually working with our youth advisory group at the moment to develop, to further develop our teen program. And we came to them with prompting questions, one of our artists, prompting questions just to help to kind of form that vision. And what they said was, we would like freedom within structure.
Yeah.
And I don't think we could say it any better than that.
Yeah.
Now, how do you get to that, and how do you shape that, of course, is sensitive, but there's a tension in that. Yeah. How much structure, how much freedom. And I think, though, that artists are excellent at holding that space,
I think that's a really great point to leave it on, with that idea of creating freedom within structure as our kind of our provocation going forward. So I'm going to hand over to the Minister for Arts now, Catherine Martin. Thank you.
A carja agus a cóglacatha illig, Tásúlagam go bhain sibh taitneamh as an códáil aniu. In the first instance, I would like to express my appreciation to the Taoiseach for opening our event today. I also wish to thank my colleagues, Minister Foley and Minister O'Gorman, for their contributions and for their ongoing support in delivering the Creative Youth Plan. I'm sure many of you will already have noted that all four of us were members of the teaching profession, so we possess something of a first-hand understanding of the challenges, the opportunities, and the rich returns that flow from investment in our children and young people. In a few short years, the Creative Ireland programme and the Creative Youth Plan have provided a framework to foster creativity in Ireland's young people. This conference today and the earlier events in April form part of a process of reflection and evaluation. As we look towards the future of creative youth after 2022, I will ensure issues for young people around equity, diversity, and social inclusion receive particular attention, especially after the tough period for them during the pandemic. The Creative Youth Expert Advisory Group will be taking stock after these events, and I would like to thank them for their continued support. In particular, I would like to pay tribute to Professor Kieran Benson, who stepped down as chair recently. Thanks to all of the contributors to today's discussion and to those who participated in the events which took place last month, including the voice of young people themselves, who you heard in the film. Hugdi an clúisbhauer de fáistí agus a ghine ógas an ama tá hart, ach tá míid ag éisteach leo inis. The Creative Youth Plan, and indeed the entire Creative Ireland programme, is not just about widening opportunities to be creative. It is about collaboration, about partnership, about making and sustaining connections. The progress in delivering on the ambition of creative youth has only been possible because of collaboration and partnership between government departments, state agencies, artists, creative organisations and community groups, and vitally, collaboration with and between young people themselves. Therefore, our continuing strategy must be one of collaboration and partnership. Ní neart go cur le céile. I also noted a very clear message to consider the mental health and well-being of young people in these challenging times. As a parent, a teacher and a minister, I am acutely aware of the need for young people to connect, or indeed reconnect, with their creative pursuits and their friends. I am equally aware that government can and must support them to do so. Creativity has played an important role at key moments in our nation's history. I believe our collective challenge as we emerge from this pandemic is to recognise the value of creativity as we respond to the mental health and well-being needs of our children and young people, to help them rekindle old connections and to forge new ones in an inclusive manner. Our focus, too, must be to enable them to carve out new individual prospects as part of our national economic recovery. As an immediate measure, therefore, I am announcing my department, through the Creative Ireland programme, will be supporting Fighting Words and Youth Theatre Ireland to provide greater opportunities for young people's personal development through creative writing and drama. These initiatives will be targeted at the most disadvantaged, offering young people who have not had these opportunities before. We will support them to discover and unleash their creative talents and provide an opportunity to explore any negative impacts the past year may have had on their well-being. The theme of today's conference, Focusing on the Future, is particularly fitting. Our society, our economy, our very way of living is changing, and changing almost every day. But as our homes, schools and workplaces become more automated and digitally dependent, we need to be more creative and innovative. Creativity becomes so much more than art, than design, than making or engineering, things of beauty. It becomes a way to live, to learn and to work. There is an urgent need to support competency and skills development, skills that are adaptable and that will enable us to keep pace with technological advances. We must enable young people to harness and marry their innate creativity and these emerging technologies in the future. But we must seek to do so in the most equitable way possible. We must ensure that those who face greatest disadvantage are not left behind and are given these opportunities to develop new skills. Therefore, I am announcing a new Creative Technologies initiative. Creative Ireland will work with a range of youth agencies to support capacity building within a variety of youth services and settings, enabling them to provide new opportunities for young people, particularly the most disadvantaged and marginalised, to gain new creative experiences in digital tech and to learn new technological skills and competencies, to help them continue or complete their education, to help gain a foothold in the employment market, to open them up to new opportunities through discovering their own innate creativity. Finally, I understand from direct experience the importance of creativity and engagement with arts and culture within the classroom, helping to uncover new ways to impart knowledge to our students and nurturing in them the skills and competencies to harness that knowledge. Our programme for government commits us to supporting innovative approaches to the development of our system of education, a system that supports lifelong learning, stronger communities, economic development, and personal health and well-being. Arts, culture, and technology-based creativity will continue to have a role to play in this. The Programme for Government commits to maintaining the Creative Schools and Creative Clusters initiatives as part of the Creative Ireland programme. I welcome Minister Foley's earlier announcement of new investment in an Artist-in-Residence programme for schools. This week is also the annual Creative Schools Celebration Week, an opportunity for schools to share, showcase, and connect all the exciting creative work that has been undertaken. I am pleased to be able to announce that with the agreement of Minister Foley and myself, the Arts Council will increase the number of placements available in the Creative Schools programme from next September. Originally catering for 150 schools annually, the programme will provide for 190 schools in 2021. Together, we will enable even greater numbers of children and young people to experience both the joy and benefits of creative activities, to start a new journey that will instill a lifelong appreciation of arts and culture, but also arm them with the skills and competencies for their futures. We have also extended the deadline for applications until June 10th to give schools more time to complete their applications. I hope that the discussions over the course of these webinars and this conference have both given you insights into the fascinating work that is taking place within our schools and our communities and homes, but also sparked a consideration of what we as a society must do next, to seek out the opportunities that lie ahead as we work together to provide greater and more equitable access to arts, culture and creativity for children and young people. Tá míid ag déanamh in eisteachta dá daghaí. Gurb maithagah.